Mon and welcome to Guild Wars 2 Daily. Today I have spent about 10-15 minutes trying to figure out exactly what we wanted to talk about, whether it was mechanics because I've had some cool questions or servers, but I think I'm going to go with servers because I just suddenly realised something really cool about the servers on the first ones on the list that I can go through. So yeah, we're going to be doing servers today, save the questions for tomorrow, and yeah, the footage in the background comes from Creeper Assassin, who sent in many different things, but I have decided to go for some Necromancer stuff, which should be quite cool. Thank you very much to them, and you can find a link down in the description below. So yeah, basically I'm going to be looking at the US servers today. We're going to start having a look at these guys, at least the very first two. So these are in alphabetical order, as if you're not unaware. This first one on the list is Anvil Rock, and then the next one is Arachnia Plateau. We can just work from the top down. So let's start with Anvil Rock. So this is a server you could choose to play on if you want. What exactly is Anvil Rock though, and what's going on with it? I did have a lot of people suggesting to me, hey, you should do some actual Guild Wars 1 in-game footage of these things. That's actually a really good idea. I've not done it for this video, but I really do like that idea, and I think I will start to do it from now on. In fact, Anvil Rock I almost feel a little bit bad about because this place looks incredible in Guild Wars. When Prophecies first, obviously as Guild Wars 1 was being released and more campaigns came out, they became technically more able to create better graphics despite not raising the minimum system requirements too high, or if at all. So essentially you had Prophecies was the first one to come out. It looked pretty good for its time. It looked very good, but then it really paled in comparison to a lot of the places in Eye of the North, which was the final thing that came out. That was just natural progression as the years went by. ArenaNet got better at making their engine look better, and technology got pushed forward, which just makes sense. But if we do look at Prophecies, and just Prophecies on its own, so ignoring all that other stuff that had more years to look better, you can honestly say that Anvil Rock is the best looking place. Obviously this is partly subjective, but a lot of people will agree it's the best looking place in Prophecies, at least. It is incredible. It's a location in the northern Shiver Peaks. So when Prophecies first came out, we had the Shiver Peaks that separated Ascalon and Kryta, this big mountain range that split between them. You can still see them there in Guild Wars 2. And they were so large, in fact, that they were split into two separate in-game regions. You had the northern Shiver Peaks and you had the southern Shiver Peaks. During the storyline, you went across the northern Shiver Peaks quite early on in the game, and far later in the game, you returned to the southern Shiver Peaks for completely different reasons, and essentially returned to that region to help the dwarves in the civil war against the Stone Summit, because the dwarves had previously helped you. So that's kind of what was going on when you got down there to the southern Shiver Peaks. Anvil Rock is located in the northern Shiver Peaks. So during the story, you would flee from Ascalon and make your way on this big Ascalonian evacuation or migration to Kryta, and by completing the main storyline missions in Prophecies, you could essentially just skip your way through those northern Shiver Peaks and take the storyline route, and you'd go through those missions and you'd get cutscenes, and then you get pushed forward and go to extra outposts, and then you'd work your way through. But if you chose not to go for the actual storyline, there was another way to pass through the Shiver Peaks, a different pass, different explorable areas basically, and one of these explorable areas you'd have to go through if you didn't want to go through the story missions to make it through the Shiver Peaks, or alternatively if you were going from Kryta to Ascalon instead of Ascalon to Kryta, your only option was to go through this area, Anvil Rock. It was one of like 3 or 4 different zones, and for the most part it was a totally optional place to be. You didn't have to go there in the story at all. You could just totally ignore it, and it was like it didn't exist. There weren't necessarily, I'm thinking off the top of my head, any quests there either. Really, maybe there was one quest that took you into a certain area of Anvil Rock, but they were quite sparse. There wasn't really anything to do there. There's an outpost, though, in this big explorable area that was called Anvil Rock. They're called Ice Tooth Cave, which was quite one of these hidden little outposts that, for me, is one of my favourite outposts out in Guild Wars 1. I've always liked the small outposts that generally weren't very busy, even when the game first came out, and you could go to them and there wouldn't be many people there, but it'd be very easy to strike up a conversation, because you say, oh, hey, what are you doing here? And you'd find out what was going on with them. And because there were so few quests that took people out that way, and because it wasn't anything to do with the main storyline, you didn't generally see many people at this place, Ice Tooth Cave. Now, Anvil Rock can mean one of two things, a bit like Abaddon's Mouth that we talked about before. It can be used to refer to the entire explorable area, which is a massive chunk of land, probably about a third of the size of Queensdale is how I would match it up compared to Guild Wars 2. So quite large, if you know what Queensdale's like in Guild Wars 2, there were the human starting area. Quite large. This is Anvil Rock, about the third the size of that, so a very big place, full of mountains. It's out there, it's very snowy up in the northern Shiver Peaks. But the thing that gives it its name, Anvil Rock, this large explorable area that was in the game, it's called Anvil Rock because within this explorable area is a particularly large mountain, and that mountain is known by the dwarves as Anvil Rock. This mountain in Guild Wars 1, unlike many mountains, you could see a lot of peaks and stuff in Guild Wars 1, but really you couldn't climb many of them. You couldn't really go everywhere you wanted. It isn't like you were playing an Elder Scrolls game or a truly open game. You couldn't look somewhere and then go. You were always confined to the boundaries of the explorable area. But Anvil Rock was this huge mountainous peak, but was also traversable. If you got up the right side of it, you could walk very high up. And if you kept climbing up this massive snowy hill, essentially, you could get right to the top, to the very peak, and you could look out over and you'd be greeted with an incredible sight. It would be this huge, massive view from many miles, shall we say, across, and it would just be a fantastic place to take screenshots. A really cool place. No, as I said, when the game first came out, no quests or anything, so it was one of these nice little hidden treats, really, that was there in Prophecies. Guild Wars has such a large world, Guild Wars 1, but especially at launch, it didn't have many quests to fill up with stuff to do, so there were a lot of these little moments. That was a big part of playing the game for me when you first got into the world, that you could explore, and even though you weren't rewarded with an achievement like I might expect to get now, or a quest or a chest or some kind of reward, your reward was the view, and it really did feel amazing to get up there. In lore, although that seems quite insignificant as far as gameplay is concerned, in lore, actually, Anvil Rock is quite significant because the dwarves have quite a particular belief system to do with it. The dwarves believe in someone called the Great Dwarf, which for a long time, and it's still ambiguous, we believe was like this one deity that kind of looked over all the dwarves. They had prophesized in their beliefs that the Great Dwarf would one day fight the Great Destroyer, and it would be this massive battle that would determine the end of the world, basically. And this was what the dwarves believed in. The events of Eye of the North elaborate on that, and it turns out it's not really the end of the world, it's just the end of the dwarves as a race when this fight happens. And it's now disputed whether the Great Dwarf is really a god, or whether it is just the name of this entity that the dwarves collectively become after they undergo the rite of the Great Dwarf. But in any case, the dwarves believe that their race, this very ancient race, the dwarves, they believe that they actually originate from Anvil Rock. They believe that they were created, the dwarven race was created by the Great Dwarf, like they were smithed into being on this giant thing, Anvil Rock, this massive mountain. That's kind of where they believe they came from. We know the story of where the dwarves believe they came from, whether that's true or whether that's just something that they developed from themselves, we can't know, but it is a very significant, interesting thing that seems to be there in the lore, and it's kind of cool. As I said, because there was no quests in Prophecies, there was very little else to be heard of from Anvil Rock. The only time really we got to go back to it was in Guild Wars Beyond. There was a quest that took place there where a lot of Guild Wars Beyond, some of the chapters of it, were to do with a love story of two characters, Gwen and Logan Thackeray, and those are like the great ancestors of Logan Thackeray. So Kieran and Gwen, basically a part of their love story is they've been apart for a very long time, a really long time, and Kieran's been missing, and when they finally reunite and where they decide to get engaged occurs here on Anvil Rock, and that's kind of cool. It's this nice moment where that's where they meet up again on Anvil Rock, and it's the kind of this romantic area to meet back up, which is really cool. But that's Anvil Rock, this great vast thing that might not sound too exciting. You might not be like, oh, I really want to go and play there, but it is quite exciting, really. If this is the place where the dwarves were forged and the dwarves are going to become a really important race in Guild Wars 2 because they know stuff about the Elder Dragons, that could be really cool. And it could also be in Guild Wars 2 as well. I didn't spend enough time around the Norn areas. It looks like maybe we could have access to generally the area where Anvil Rock was. But the thing with Guild Wars 2 is because the scale is so much higher now and they've got a proper Z-axis in the game and it's not faked or anything, the mountains in general are just huge. And I wonder whether this means Anvil Rock now has been scaled even higher to really stand out even furthermore like it did from Guild Wars 1. If it is in Guild Wars 2, this thing could look absolutely incredible. There are theories that, or at least there were theories for a while until we got the location, that the Dermond Priory were located at Anvil Rock, but in recent times it seems like that's not necessarily what's happened. That would have been quite cool if the Priory was set up there. But anyway, yeah, that's Anvil Rock. It's got a cave underneath it, Ice Tooth Cave, which was this cool little place you could go hide out in Guild Wars 1. As I said, it was an incredible view there, and it means a lot to a lot of people from the original game. Could be a very significant place in lore. If you're into the Shiver Peaks, then maybe this could be something for you. It is a very, very cool area, and one of my favourite places from Guild Wars 1. If you told me, give me a landmark from the Northern Shiver Peaks, bang, straight away it would be Anvil Rock, without a doubt. Whether they are referring as the server to the entire explorable area, which encompasses much more than just the actual Anvil Rock itself, or the giant mountain that you can climb on, who knows? But it's certainly a cool idea for a server name. I do think so. So that's interesting. But what really excited me, what made me decide to do servers today instead of mechanics, was the next one on the list, which is pretty crazy, actually. I'm looking at it now, and I can't believe that actually this is what they've gone with. The second one on the list, is alphabetical order, is Arachnia Plateau. Right. Okay, where do we even start here with Arachnia Plateau? In Guild Wars factions a little bit, but particularly in Nightfall and Eye of the North, the players managed to find their way into the guildwars.dat file, and in here they found many little interesting tidbits about the game and cool skills that are kind of in the game's files and places that are kind of in the game's files but you can't access or don't seem to do anything, and they could find lots of cool, interesting little things. Some of these things, particularly in Nightfall, were descriptions of landmarks that exist within the specific campaign. So Nightfall, for example, as you're running around in-game, you might run up and find this giant statue or temple or something significant in the game world, and you'll look at it and you'll be like, that's really cool. There won't be any way to interact with it, there won't be any NPCs to talk to about it, and you won't get any lore necessarily aside from just looking at it, and that will be that for a normal player, and then you'll leave. But if you go into the guildwars.dat, you can actually pull information about these locations up, where you would get specific lore written by the writers about these places in-game that are in the game files, except it's not actually accessible without hacking it. So there's information that we've come across that, while is very cool and describes things you can feasibly actually see in-game, it was never actually established to be 100% canon. So, although I mentioned it while I was doing my LP of Eye of the North and of Nightfall, in particular Nightfall, although I mentioned the existence of these things and what these little bits of lore were that weren't necessarily canon, that it might not mean anything, that it could easily be retconned, and ArenaNet could say, well, look, that was never official lore in the first place. And that was it. That was that. There was interesting little bits of lore, but we never thought anything more of it because it might not have been canon. Now they've named one of their servers, the Guild Wars 2 servers, Arachnia Plateau. And this is one of those little bits of information from the guildwars.dat. So what are ArenaNet doing here? Are they telling us that the Arachnia Plateau actually is what it's described as in the guildwars.dat? Are we confirming what's going on here now? Because if they are confirming that, that's one of the most interesting, deep, cool bits of lore that, in my mind, possibly even exists in all of Nightfall. So Nightfall has us go into the Realm of Torment, where Abaddon had been imprisoned and sent to. And within the Realm of Torment, we hear little hints and tips every now and then about how there could have been a god that preceded Abaddon. The story of Nightfall is how Abaddon fell, and then we defeat him, and Cormyr usurps him. It's how someone became a god. And in those final chapters of Nightfall, it talks a little bit about how gods are made. And there's a few hints that are thrown out about how Abaddon also had a predecessor of his own. And there's lots of hints in all these little guildwars.dat things that suggest the previous god was a giant spider. And not only this, but this dead spider actually exists within the Realm of Torment. So one of the explorable areas in the Realm of Torment, as you're running around, if you look, you'll see these giant like claws or legs. Like imagine you've just killed a spider, okay, and it's died, curled its legs up around itself and rolled out onto its back. Now imagine that spider is so large you can be walking around on its belly and you wouldn't even know that you were on a spider because it was that large. But when you look off to the horizon, you do see these giant crumpled over legs looming over you in the darkness. Obviously everything in the Realm of Torment is horrific and dangerous and deadly and scary, but that is one of the areas that you're walking around on. And it looks like you're on the underbelly of a spider, but that was obviously never confirmed in lore because there was nothing specifically in-game that said it, except in the guildwars.dat. Listen to this. This is what it says. Arachnia Plateau was one of the files, I guess, in the guildwars.dat. And it reads, a field of soft, leathery soil broken up into rolling plates, like the palm of one's hand or the underbelly of a spider. It gives only slightly when you walk on it, and it makes a soft, sighing noise. So this is describing the area we were walking on, and it describes it also as the underbelly of a spider, which is obviously what it looks like, which is kind of interesting. But then further into more little bits of guildwars.dat, they're like, for example, another area is known as the Harvestman's Lair, which reads as, this place is a flooded cavern filled with the remains of the gods of insectoid beings. No native spiders are ever seen, but there is the scurry of thin legs, and something made all of those webs. And lastly, here's another really good one, the Spider's Heart. This is another area in the same place, glowing radiance of evil at the heart of Arachnia. This place is said to be the remains of a now dead spider god, older than Abaddon and the 5 true gods themselves. So these are, I'm not going to read out all of the little bits of the guildwars.dat because we could be here all day, but basically understand this: in the realm of torment there is a picture painted that Abaddon had a god before him, and not just any god, it was a giant spider god. It was older than Abaddon and even all the other 5 gods themselves, and it existed, and it was this real thing in lore that was eventually defeated and usurped, and now you're like walking around on the underbelly, and that is the Arachnia Plateau. It's this big area in the mists, essentially, in the realm of torment that you're walking around on. And it was always something we never knew whether was 100% canon, but it was this crazy idea of this previous god, this giant spider, that now ArenaNet are directly referencing. Arachnia Plateau is not something that appears that you would ever understand or appreciate if you hadn't looked in the guildwars.dat, and now here they are directly naming a server after it. They've named a server after the old dead spider god. That's basically what they've done. So, if you like the idea of playing on a server named after that, something so deep into lore, one of the big mysteries, one of the really awesome, scary, dark, cool things that came out of Nightfall, then there you go. They've named a server for that. And I thought that was crazy. That blew my mind when I saw that they've directly referenced something from the guildwars.dat. And whether that's them opening it up and saying, now, look, all of these things, all this lore about Abaddon having dead children and all these kinds of crazy things that you could see, if they're now saying that's canon, that could be very, very interesting. It's got very wide and far-reaching implications. It's really cool. And yeah, just a very cool server name. I hope that one sticks. I really do, when the servers get cut down, if they get cut down. And yeah, there you go, guys. That's only 2. Whatever, we're making progress. It was 1 before, 2 today. Anvil Rock and Arachnia Plateau, both US servers. It's up to you to decide if you want to play in them. We'll continue on another day. I want to do mechanics though tomorrow. Actually, no, tomorrow there won't be anything because the lore summary's coming out. So I hope you're excited about that. I certainly am. And yeah, that's probably about it. So thanks very much, guys. And I guess I will see you tomorrow. See you next time.